Karen called 911 screaming there's a stranger in my house. Red and blue lights swept across my walls. I stood at my front door completely calm because I knew exactly who was inside my kitchen. The officer stepped in, looked at my backyard pool and froze. What they found changed everything. Comment your state plus HOA if you've ever battled your HOA. Hit subscribe to HOA Karen Stories 88 for more receipts over decibels drama. Let's dive into how I turned the tables using nothing but paperwork and a little creative landscaping. I should have known something was wrong when I came home from work last Tuesday and my key wouldn't turn. The deadbolt felt different, looser somehow, like someone had been messing with it. I jiggled the handle, tried the key again, and that's when I saw the bright yellow notice taped to my door. HOA violation for security breach effective immediately, locks changed for community safety. Signed by Beverly Kincaid, HOA board member. The same Beverly who I'd caught on my Ring camera doing laps in my pool just 3 days earlier while I was at my engineering job downtown. Now let me paint you a picture of Beverly. She's the kind of person who measures your grass with a ruler and calls it community service. After her day spa went under during the lockdowns, she'd thrown herself into HOA politics like it was her personal therapy session. The woman had master keys to every house in our subdivision and used them like they were her own personal skeleton keys. But here's the thing about entitled people, they always overplay their hand. And Beverly Kincaid was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor Dolores, who'd lived in this neighborhood since the Carter administration. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear her television in the background, probably watching the news about the latest immigration policy changes that had everyone on edge. Before I could even explain what happened, she was already heading over with a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. That's when I knew Beverly had messed with the wrong person, because Dolores had been keeping HOA receipts since before Beverly even moved to our state. While I was waiting for Dolores, I decided to review my Ring camera footage from the weekend. What I found made my blood pressure spike faster than gas prices. There was Beverly Sunday afternoon using what looked suspiciously like a master key to open my back gate. She spent a good 20 minutes in my pool doing what she later claimed was checking for algae buildup. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. The kicker was the email notification I'd received about the lock change sent at 4:15 p.m., but with metadata showing it was actually composed and edited at 6:23 p.m., nearly 4 hours after Beverly had finished her unauthorized swimming session. That's when things got really interesting. Beverly must have seen me pulling into my driveway because 15 minutes later I heard sirens. Officer Lang arrived looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably dealing with real crime instead of HOA drama. Beverly appeared from her house across the street wrapped in a bathrobe and playing the concerned neighbor role like she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera. She pointed at me with the dramatic flair of someone who watches too much cable news and told the officer there was an intruder trying to break into my house. Officer Lang looked at me, looked at Beverly, then looked at the yellow notice still taped to my door. He asked for my ID and property deed, which I keep in my car because I've learned that documentation is everything when dealing with HOA nonsense. The look on Beverly's face when I produced a clean title and valid driver's license was priceless. It was the same expression people get when they realize their favorite restaurant has been overcharging them for months. Officer Lang turned on his body cam, which was standard procedure, and asked Beverly to explain exactly what emergency situation justified changing someone's locks without their knowledge or consent. That's when Beverly made her first major mistake. She started explaining how she had used her master key to access my property for a routine safety inspection of my pool area. She mentioned the algae, the potential slip hazards, and her deep concern for neighborhood children who might somehow scale my 6-foot privacy fence. Officer Lang nodded politely while his body cam recorded every word. What Beverly didn't realize was that she'd just admitted on camera to entering my property without permission, using HOA master keys for personal use, and changing my locks based on a safety inspection that she'd conducted after swimming in my pool. Dolores arrived just as Beverly was digging herself deeper into her hole of excuses. My elderly neighbor had brought her original HOA covenant documents, the ones from 1987 that clearly stated emergency access could only be used for immediate threats to life or property, with written documentation required within 24 hours. She also had a thick stack of certified mail receipts showing every time she'd challenged Beverly's previous overreach attempts. The community was starting to take notice too, with neighbors stepping out onto their porches to see what all the commotion was about. In our subdivision, police cars were rarer than reasonable gas prices, so everyone wanted to know what was happening. Officer Lang took down all our statements, photographed the yellow notice, and made copies of my property documents. He explained that this appeared to be a civil matter involving property access rights, but that Beverly's admission of using master keys without proper authorization could constitute trespassing. The best part was when he handed me a case number and suggested I file a formal complaint with both the police department and the county courthouse. Beverly's face went white when she realized her 911 call had just created an official paper trail that documented her own violations. As the officer was leaving, Beverly tried one last desperate move. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my pool area, claiming she needed documentation for the HOA's insurance company. That's when I realized she was planning to double down on her safety concerns narrative. What she didn't know was that I'd already emailed our subdivision's community Facebook group administrator, a young guy named Trevor who worked in social media marketing. I'd sent him the Ring camera footage along with a polite request to make sure everyone understood the full context of tonight's police visit. The last thing I saw before heading inside to call a locksmith was Beverly marching back to her house with her phone pressed to her ear. I could hear her angry voice carrying across the street something about public health risks and irresponsible pool maintenance. Little did she know that her phone call was about to create exactly the kind of documentation trail that would come back to haunt her. Sometimes the best way to catch someone in a lie is to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. And Beverly Kincaid was about to provide me with enough rope to stock a marina. That night I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and my laptop methodically organizing every piece of evidence I'd collected. The Ring camera footage, the metadata from Beverly's email, Officer Lang's case number, and Dolores's covenant documents. I also drafted a certified letter to the HOA board, requesting immediate access to their master key log, along with any documentation justifying the emergency lock change. In the background, the news was covering the latest federal spending bill that had everyone arguing about government overreach. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was dealing with my own little version of government overreach right here in suburban America. Wednesday morning came with two surprises. First, my certified letter to the HOA had been delivered and signed for by none other than Chet Bannerman, our interim HOA president, who looked like he'd rather be fishing than dealing with Beverly's drama. Second, Trevor from the community Facebook group had sent me a screenshot that made my coffee taste even better. Beverly had sent him a draft post about my pool being a public health hazard, but she'd accidentally included her revision notes in the message. Notes that specifically mentioned using terms like biosafety threat and community contamination risk. I called Dolores and suggested we meet with Eldon Reyes, our retired federal judge neighbor who lived 2 streets over. Eldon had the kind of legal experience that made HOA board members nervous, especially when they'd been cutting corners on proper procedures. When we arrived at his house, he was already reviewing the HOA covenants on his tablet while CNN discussed the latest Supreme Court ruling about property rights. Perfect timing, I thought, since that's exactly what we were dealing with on a much smaller scale. Eldon read through everything with the methodical pace of someone who'd spent decades untangling legal messes. He pointed out that Beverly's email trail created what lawyers call a timeline problem. Her emergency justification email was sent before her supposed safety inspection, but the metadata showed it was actually written hours after she'd been swimming in my pool. He also noted that the HOA's insurance policy, which I'd requested a copy of, specifically excluded coverage for board member actions taken outside their official capacity. The real breakthrough came when Dolores produced her ace in the hole. She'd been keeping detailed records of every time Beverly had used the master keys cross-referenced with the community Facebook posts about security concerns. The pattern was clear as daylight. Beverly would find an excuse to enter someone's property, usually when they weren't home, then create a safety violation based on what she'd observed during her unauthorized visit. 3 other families had been hit with similar surprise fee assessments after Beverly's mystery inspections, but none of them had Ring cameras to document what really happened. That's when Eldon suggested we request something called a spoliation notice. Basically, it's a formal demand that the HOA preserve all evidence related to our dispute, including master key logs, email communications, and any security camera footage from their office building. He helped me draft a letter that was polite but firm, explaining that any destruction of evidence could result in serious legal consequences. We sent copies to Chet Bannerman Beverly and their property management company, all via certified mail with return receipts requested. By Thursday afternoon, things started moving fast. Officer Lang stopped by to give me a copy of his body cam footage, which was public record once requested through proper channels. The video was even better than I'd hoped. Beverly's admission about using master keys for property inspection was crystal clear, and her explanation about swimming in my pool to check for algae was preserved in high-definition digital format. The officer mentioned that several neighbors had called to ask about filing their own complaints against Beverly for similar master key incidents. That evening brought the first sign that our paper trail strategy was working. Chet Bannerman called me, directly bypassing Beverly entirely. His voice had the nervous energy of someone who just realized his homeowner's insurance might not cover the HOA's legal liabilities. He mentioned that the board was willing to discuss a reasonable resolution to our lock situation. What he didn't say, but what I could hear in his tone, was that Beverly's latest schemes were making everyone nervous about potential lawsuits. The community Facebook group was buzzing with activity too. Trevor had posted a carefully neutral update about HOA transparency, asking residents to share their experiences with property inspections and fee assessments. The response was overwhelmingly critical of Beverly's recent power grab tactics. People were sharing stories about surprise violations, unexplained fee increases, and mysterious master key usage. The comment section read like a support group for HOA abuse survivors, with everyone comparing notes about Beverly's creative interpretation of community safety rules. Friday brought the most interesting development yet. Zoe Patel, a college communications student who lived with her parents across from the neighborhood park, messaged me about live streaming the next HOA board meeting. She explained that community transparency was part of her senior project about local government accountability. What made this perfect was that Zoe had the technical skills to archive everything in real time, creating an uneditable record of whatever happened during the meeting. Her timing couldn't have been better, considering the national conversation about accountability in local government. Meanwhile, Beverly was escalating her campaign in predictable ways. She'd started a counter-narrative about irresponsible pool maintenance and potential liability issues for the HOA's insurance coverage. Her latest community Facebook post included stock photos of algae-covered pools and statistics about drowning incidents that had nothing to do with our actual situation. The problem with Beverly's approach was that she was trying to win a facts-based argument using emotion and fear tactics. Not a great strategy when your opponent has bodycam footage and time-stamped metadata. Dolores and I spent Saturday morning visiting other neighbors who'd been targeted by Beverly's master key expeditions. The Martinez family had been hit with a landscaping violation after Beverly noticed their sprinkler system during one of her unauthorized property visits. The Johnsons received a parking violation notice the day after Beverly had walked through their driveway to inspect their trash cans. Each family had similar stories about Beverly's creative safety concerns and the surprise fee assessments that followed her uninvited inspections. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Beverly was systematically using her HOA position to generate revenue through manufactured violations. Her method was simple but effective. Use master keys to access properties, document anything that could remotely be considered a violation, then issue fees that most people would pay rather than fight. The genius of her scheme was that most homeowners didn't know they had the right to challenge HOA decisions or request documentation for emergency access claims. Sunday evening, I received an email that changed everything. The city's code enforcement office had received an anonymous complaint about unpermitted pool modifications in our subdivision. The complaint specifically mentioned my property and included photos that could only have been taken from inside my backyard. Photos that showed my pool from angles that matched exactly with Beverly's Ring camera swimming session. The complaint was filed on Tuesday, the same day Beverly had changed my locks using a generic email address that traced back to a VPN service. That's when I realized Beverly wasn't just playing fast and loose with HOA rules. She was actively trying to get me in trouble with the city government, hoping that external pressure would force me to back down from challenging her authority. The problem with Beverly's strategy was that she'd filed a false complaint with a government agency, which moved our dispute from civil HOA drama into potential criminal territory. Filing false reports with code enforcement was actually a misdemeanor in our county, punishable by fines and community service. I spent Sunday night researching something I'd never thought I'd need to know: how to convert a residential swimming pool into a temporary biological research habitat. Turns out there are plenty of legitimate educational and environmental reasons to transform pools into controlled ecosystem studies. The city even had a pilot program encouraging urban biodiversity projects complete with permits and official signage. If Beverly wanted to play games with government agencies, I was about to show her what happens when someone actually knows how to work within the system instead of trying to abuse it. Monday morning, I walked into the city's environmental services office with a folder full of permits, research proposals, and documentation that would make a federal auditor proud. My plan was elegant in its simplicity. If Beverly wanted to claim my pool was a public safety hazard, I'd convert it into something that was officially sanctioned, educationally valuable, and completely out of her jurisdiction. The beauty of bureaucracy is that once you get the right stamps and signatures, even the most determined Karen has to back down. The environmental coordinator, Maria Santos, listened to my proposal with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely gets to approve interesting projects. I wanted to create a temporary urban wetland ecosystem for studying pollinator habitats and water filtration systems. The project would include native aquatic plants, beneficial bacteria cultures, and educational signage for community learning. Maria explained that the city had been looking for demonstration sites for their green infrastructure initiative, especially with all the recent federal funding for environmental resilience projects. What made this perfect was the timing. The Biden administration had just announced another round of environmental justice grants, and our county was competing for funding to expand urban sustainability programs. My little pool conversion project could serve as a pilot study for larger wetland restoration efforts. Maria helped me fill out the application for a temporary land use permit which would officially designate my backyard as a research site under city environmental protection guidelines. By Tuesday afternoon, I had my permits approved and laminated. The official documentation stated that my property was participating in a 6-month urban ecosystem study with full city backing and environmental compliance certification. The permit came with requirements for safety barriers, educational signage, and regular monitoring by certified environmental technicians. It also included a clause that prohibited any unauthorized interference with the research project, backed by potential fines of up to $5,000 for violations. The transformation itself was surprisingly straightforward. I hired Aquascience Solutions, a local company that specialized in biological water treatment systems. They installed a series of UV filtration units, aerobic bacteria cultures, and native plant species that would create a functioning mini wetland ecosystem. The water turned a rich green color that looked dramatic, but was actually perfectly safe, teeming with beneficial microorganisms that naturally filtered impurities and supported local wildlife. The visual effect was exactly what I'd hoped for. From Beverly's house across the street, my backyard looked like something from a nature documentary about swamp ecosystems. The large educational signs explained the science behind biological water treatment and the importance of urban biodiversity. Solar-powered aerators created gentle bubbling sounds that attracted birds and butterflies. Most importantly, everything was completely legal, environmentally beneficial, and officially protected by city ordinances. Wednesday brought Beverly's predictable meltdown. She started with a phone call to city code enforcement, demanding an immediate inspection of my unpermitted pool modifications. The code enforcement officer, Dave Mitchell, arrived within hours and spent 30 minutes reviewing my permits, taking water samples, and photographing the educational signage. His report concluded that my project exceeded all safety requirements and represented a model for future urban environmental initiatives. Beverly's second attempt involved calling the county health department with claims about mosquito breeding and water contamination. The health inspector, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, arrived Thursday morning with water testing equipment and a checklist of public health concerns. After testing for bacteria levels, chemical composition, and vector breeding potential, she filed a report praising the project's use of natural mosquito control methods and biological filtration systems. The BTI bacterial treatment I'd included specifically prevented mosquito larvae while supporting beneficial insect populations. That's when Beverly made her biggest mistake yet. Frustrated by the official approval of my project, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Friday evening, while I was at work, my Ring cameras caught her climbing over my fence with a bottle of liquid that looked suspiciously like chlorine bleach. Her plan seemed to be contaminating my wetland project to force the city to shut it down. What she didn't realize was that tampering with a city-approved environmental research site was a felony under state environmental protection laws. The footage was crystal clear. Beverly entered my property without permission, poured an unknown chemical substance into my permitted wetland system, and attempted to remove some of the educational signage. She spent nearly 20 minutes documenting the contamination with her phone, apparently planning to report the damage as evidence of my project's failure. The irony was perfect. Beverly was creating the exact safety hazard she'd been claiming to prevent, while I had video evidence of her criminal environmental sabotage. Saturday morning brought the cavalry. Dr. Walsh returned for a routine follow-up inspection and immediately noticed the chemical contamination. Water tests revealed chlorine levels that could only have come from deliberate dumping, not natural processes. When I showed her the Ring camera footage, her expression shifted from scientific curiosity to legal concern. Environmental crime was serious business, especially when it involved federally funded research projects and deliberate ecosystem destruction. The police response was swift and thorough. Officer Lang returned with backup and an environmental crimes specialist from the county sheriff's department. They collected water samples, photographed the damaged signage, and reviewed every minute of Ring camera footage. Beverly's unauthorized entry, chemical dumping, and attempted evidence tampering were documented with the same precision typically reserved for major criminal investigations. The Environmental Crimes Unit explained that sabotaging protected ecosystems carried both state and federal penalties. By Sunday, the neighborhood was buzzing with activity. Word had spread about Beverly's environmental sabotage, and people were starting to connect the dots about her previous master key incidents. The Martinez family mentioned that their sprinkler system had mysteriously malfunctioned after Beverly's property inspection. The Johnsons remembered finding chemical stains on their driveway after one of Beverly's surprise visits. A pattern of property damage was emerging that went far beyond simple HOA overreach. Chet Bannerman called me Sunday evening with panic in his voice. The HOA's insurance company had been notified about potential criminal liability involving board member actions. Their coverage specifically excluded crimes committed by elected officials, which meant Beverly's environmental sabotage could expose every homeowner in the subdivision to personal liability for damages. The insurance agent had recommended immediately suspending Beverly from all HOA activities, pending resolution of the criminal charges. Trevor from the Facebook group posted a community update that perfectly captured the mood shift in our neighborhood. People were no longer discussing whether Beverly had overstepped her authority. They were asking how long she'd been abusing her position and what other damage she might have caused. The comments section included dozens of stories about mysterious property issues, unexplained violations, and suspicious master key usage. Beverly had gone from self-appointed community protector to suspected serial property criminal in less than a week. The most satisfying part was watching my wetland ecosystem recover from Beverly's sabotage attempt. The biological filtration system was designed to handle contamination, and within days the chlorine levels returned to normal. New plant growth appeared where Beverly had tried to damage the vegetation. Butterflies and dragonflies returned to the area, creating exactly the kind of urban biodiversity the city project was meant to support. Nature was literally healing from Beverly's attempted destruction. Monday brought news that changed everything. The Environmental Crimes Unit had completed their investigation and filed formal charges against Beverly for criminal mischief, environmental sabotage, and trespassing on protected research property. The charges carried potential jail time, substantial fines, and mandatory community service requirements. Beverly's attempt to shut down my project had escalated our HOA dispute into a criminal case with serious legal consequences. The final twist came Tuesday morning when Maria Santos called to congratulate me on the project's success. The City Council had voted to feature my wetland conversion as a model for their upcoming Environmental Resilience Grant application. My little pool project was going to be showcased as an example of citizen-led conservation efforts that deserved federal funding support. Beverly's attempts to destroy my project had actually helped it gain official recognition and government support. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and by Wednesday night, everyone in the subdivision knew it was going to be a showdown. Zoe had set up her live stream equipment like she was covering a presidential debate, complete with multiple camera angles and real-time comment moderation. The community center hadn't seen this much activity since the 4th of July barbecue, except this time people were bringing legal documents instead of potato salad. I arrived early with my folder of evidence, everything organized in chronological order, with sticky tabs marking the most important documents. Ring camera footage, police reports, environmental permits, water quality test results, and email metadata, all neatly arranged for easy reference. Dolores sat beside me with her own stack of HOA covenant violations, while Eldon positioned himself near the back with his legal pad and the expression of someone who'd watched many careers end in rooms just like this one. Beverly entered the room like she was walking into her own coronation, apparently believing that confidence could overcome criminal charges and environmental sabotage evidence. She dressed for battle in a sharp business suit and carried a presentation folder that looked suspiciously thick for someone whose position was supposed to be under review. Chet followed behind her with the defeated posture of a man who'd realized his interim presidency was about to become a permanent footnote in HOA history. The live stream chat was already exploding with comments from neighbors who couldn't attend in person. Trevor was moderating the feed while simultaneously taking notes on his laptop, creating a real-time record of everything being said. Zoe had explained that the stream was being archived automatically, so every word and gesture would be preserved in digital amber for future reference. In an era where accountability often disappeared faster than honest politicians, that permanent record was exactly what we needed. Beverly opened with her standard performance about community safety and property values, conveniently omitting any mention of criminal charges or environmental sabotage. She claimed that my pool conversion represented a dangerous precedent that could turn our subdivision into an unregulated wetland refuge. Her presentation included carefully selected photos that made my project look like a swamp monster habitat rather than a city-approved environmental research site. That's when I stood up and asked permission to present the other side of the story. Chet looked relieved to have someone else take control of the meeting's direction. I started with the ring camera footage of Beverly's original unauthorized swimming session, then walked through the timeline of lock changes, false police reports, and manufactured safety violations. The room grew quieter with each piece of evidence, especially when I played the body cam footage of Beverly admitting to using master keys for property inspections. The real bombshell came when I displayed the Environmental Crimes Unit's investigation report. Beverly's face went pale as I read the formal charges against her, including criminal mischief, environmental sabotage, and trespassing on protected research property. The live stream chat erupted with shocked reactions from neighbors who hadn't realized the situation had escalated to criminal proceedings. Several people in the room pulled out their phones to research the penalties for environmental crimes in our state. Dolores took the floor next with her master key usage documentation. She'd cross-referenced Beverly's property inspection claims with the actual master key log entries, revealing a pattern of unauthorized access that spanned 18 months and involved at least 12 different properties. Each unauthorized entry had been followed by violation notices and fee assessments that generated thousands of dollars in revenue for the HOA's administrative budget. The financial motivation behind Beverly's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. That's when Beverly made her final fatal mistake. Instead of apologizing or stepping down gracefully, she doubled down on her authority claims and accused me of manipulating environmental permits to avoid legitimate safety regulations. She demanded that the board override the city's approval and force me to restore my pool to its original condition. Her rant included conspiracy theories about environmental activists infiltrating suburban HOAs and federal overreach in local property management. Eldon Reyes stood up slowly and asked Beverly a simple question that changed the entire dynamic of the meeting. Did she understand that demanding violation of city environmental permits could expose every homeowner in the subdivision to federal environmental crimes? Liability. His judicial voice carried the weight of decades spent unraveling exactly these kinds of legal disasters. Beverly's confident facade crumbled as she realized her demands could implicate the entire HOA board in criminal obstruction of environmental protection laws. The community response was swift and devastating. Mrs. Chen from Maple Street stood up to describe Beverly's unauthorized inspection of her garden shed and the subsequent violation notice for storing lawn equipment in an agricultural building. The Kowalski family shared their story about Beverly's surprise basement inspection and the mysterious water damage that appeared after her visit. One by one, neighbors revealed similar experiences with Beverly's creative interpretation of safety regulations and property access rights. Trevor disclosed the most damaging evidence yet. Beverly had been sending him detailed instructions for social media posts designed to damage specific homeowners' reputations. The message history showed her coordinating campaigns against anyone who challenged her authority, including fabricated safety concerns and selectively edited photos. The community Facebook group that was supposed to facilitate neighborhood communication had been weaponized for personal vendettas and reputation destruction. The breaking point came when Zoe announced that the live stream had attracted attention from local news stations and property rights advocacy groups. Our small HOA meeting had become a case study in local government accountability and homeowner protection rights. The chat was filled with comments from legal professionals, environmental scientists, and municipal officials who were following our story as an example of how citizen activism could overcome corrupt local authorities. Chet finally found his backbone and called for an immediate vote of no confidence in Beverly's board position. The motion passed unanimously among the homeowners present, with Beverly casting the only dissenting vote for herself. The live stream chat celebrated with virtual applause while Beverly gathered her papers with the dignity of someone cleaning out their office after being fired for embezzlement. Her reign of HOA terror was officially over. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to establish new transparency requirements for all HOA operations. Master key usage would be logged and reported monthly. Property inspections would require written justification and homeowner notification. All violation notices would include photographic evidence and appeal procedures. The changes were designed to prevent future Beverly situations while protecting legitimate homeowner rights and community safety. As people filed out of the community center, the mood was celebratory but cautious. Everyone understood that removing Beverly was just the first step in rebuilding trust and accountability in our subdivision's governance. The live stream had created a permanent record of her abuses, and the community's response serving as both historical documentation and a warning to future board members who might be tempted to abuse their positions. The final moment of the evening came when Beverly approached me near the parking lot. She attempted one last manipulation, suggesting that my environmental project was really about revenge rather than conservation. I simply handed her a copy of the city's Environmental Excellence Award nomination that Maria Santos had submitted on behalf of my wetland conversion project. Sometimes the best response to petty accusations is documented proof of actual achievement. 3 weeks later, I stood in my backyard watching a group of elementary school students learn about urban ecosystems, while Beverly Kincaid picked up litter as part of her court-ordered community service. The environmental crimes judge had been particularly unimpressed with her sabotage of a city-approved research project, especially given the federal funding implications and the deliberate nature of her chemical dumping. 200 hours of environmental restoration work seemed like poetic justice for someone who'd claimed to be protecting community safety. The transformation in our subdivision went far beyond my backyard wetland project. Chet had resigned as interim president, replaced by Maria Rodriguez, a retired teacher who'd moved to our neighborhood specifically for its community-oriented atmosphere. Maria's first official act was publishing the complete HOA financial records online, revealing that Beverly's creative fee assessments had generated nearly $30,000 in unauthorized revenue over the past 2 years. The money had been used for landscaping projects around Beverly's own property and administrative expenses that looked suspiciously like personal entertainment costs. Dolores had been elected to the board as secretary, bringing her decades of record-keeping expertise to an organization that desperately needed better documentation practices. Her first initiative was creating a neighborhood resource center where homeowners could access all HOA documents, request property inspection records, and file complaints through a formal review process. The transparency was revolutionary for a community that had operated under Beverly's secretive authority structure for nearly 3 years. The master key situation had been resolved through a comprehensive security upgrade funded by the recovered unauthorized fees. Every lock in the subdivision was rekeyed with a new master system that required dual authorization for emergency access. Property inspections now followed a standardized protocol with advance notice, photographic documentation, and automatic appeal rights for any violation notices. The changes eliminated the arbitrary enforcement that had made Beverly's abuse of power possible. My wetland project had become a genuine success story that attracted attention far beyond our subdivision. The City Council featured it in their Environmental Resilience Grant application, which secured federal funding for expanding urban biodiversity initiatives throughout the county. Local schools added my backyard to their science curriculum as an example of citizen-led conservation efforts. The project that started as a response to HOA harassment had evolved into a model for community environmental stewardship. The legal consequences for Beverly continued to unfold in ways that reinforced the seriousness of her crimes. Beyond the community service requirements, she faced civil liability for property damage caused by her unauthorized inspections and chemical sabotage. The Environmental Restoration Fund she was required to establish would support wetland projects throughout the region for years to come. Her homeowner's insurance had denied coverage for the legal costs, leaving her personally responsible for attorney fees and damage assessments. Trevor had transformed our community Facebook group from Beverly's propaganda platform into a genuine forum for neighborhood communication and mutual support. The group now featured regular updates about city services, local business recommendations, and collaborative projects like community gardens and emergency preparedness networks. The toxic atmosphere of surveillance and fear had been replaced by the kind of civic engagement that makes neighborhoods genuinely stronger and safer. Officer Lang stopped by occasionally to check on the wetland project and chat with visiting school groups about community policing and environmental protection. His body cam footage from that first night had become part of police training materials about de-escalating domestic disputes and documenting evidence properly. The case demonstrated how good documentation and professional procedures could protect both citizens and law enforcement from false accusations and manufactured emergencies. The most satisfying development was watching former victims of Beverly's schemes reclaim their properties and their confidence. The Martinez family had restored their garden to its original beauty, free from fear of arbitrary violations. The Johnsons had installed security cameras and joined the new HOA Transparency Committee. Throughout the subdivision, people were making improvements and investments they'd avoided during Beverly's reign of manufactured violations and surprise fee assessments. Zoe's live stream of the HOA meeting had garnered over 50,000 views and inspired similar transparency efforts in subdivisions across the state. She'd been invited to speak at municipal government conferences about using social media technology to increase accountability in local governance. Her senior project had evolved into a statewide initiative for homeowner rights protection and HOA reform advocacy. The environmental benefits of my project continued to exceed expectations. The wetland ecosystem had attracted 17 different bird species, including several that hadn't been documented in our area for decades. Butterfly populations had increased measurably, and the natural mosquito control was so effective that our subdivision had seen a significant reduction in pest-related complaints. The project proved that individual environmental action could create meaningful ecological improvements, even in suburban settings. 6 months after Beverly's removal from the HOA board, our subdivision had become a model for community governance and environmental stewardship. Property values had increased due to the improved transparency and environmental amenities. The neighborhood's social media presence attracted positive attention from local government and conservation organizations. Most importantly, residents felt empowered to participate in community decisions without fear of retaliation or arbitrary enforcement. The final chapter in Beverly's story came when she was forced to sell her house and move to a different county to avoid ongoing legal complications and community service requirements. Her replacement neighbors were a young family who appreciated both the environmental projects and the community governance reforms that had emerged from our confrontation. They volunteered immediately for the HOA Transparency Committee, and contributed to the neighborhood emergency preparedness network. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Beverly's attempt to abuse her HOA authority had actually strengthened our community in ways that normal governance never could have achieved. Her overreach had forced us to examine our systems, document our rights, and create accountability mechanisms that protected everyone's interests. Sometimes the best response to petty tyranny is persistent documentation and creative compliance with legitimate authority. The Wetland Project continues to thrive now in its second year of operation with permanent city approval and ongoing educational programming. What started as a response to HOA harassment had become a lasting contribution to urban environmental conservation and community education. The transformation proved that individual action properly documented and legally supported could create positive change that benefits everyone involved. This story isn't really about pools or HOAs or even Karen drama. It's about what happens when ordinary people decide that documentation beats intimidation, facts trump fear tactics, and creative legal solutions can turn harassment into positive community change. In a time when many Americans feel powerless against bureaucratic overreach and institutional abuse, this story demonstrates that patient persistence and proper procedures can still achieve justice. Beverly represented the worst aspects of unaccountable local power, using fear and manufactured emergencies to control her neighbors and extract money through arbitrary violations. Her defeat wasn't achieved through confrontation or escalation, but through careful documentation, legal compliance, and community organizing. The environmental project that emerged from her harassment became a lasting benefit that continues to serve educational and conservation purposes years later. If you enjoyed this deep dive into HOA accountability and environmental justice, La HOA Karen Stories 88 has dozens more tales of ordinary people using extraordinary persistence to overcome bureaucratic bullying and neighborhood tyranny. Each story features real tactics, legal strategies, and creative solutions that you can adapt to your own situations. Subscribe now to join a community that believes in receipts over rhetoric, evidence over emotions, and long-term solutions over quick revenge. The comment section is always open for sharing your own experiences with HOA overreach, environmental activism, or creative compliance strategies that turned harassment into positive change.